I just touched on. For Gavin Newsom, he is emerging, and lots of people talk about as potentially having ambitions for the White House one day, being the Democrat nominee. As the chief Trump tormentor-in-chief, he is enjoying that position to a degree. I mean, today I think he's been talking about some of the personal difficulty and problems his family are having as a result of some of this. But he's also, been tweeting out Trump's border czar being, come at me, tough guy, and so forth. So he's been really leaning into the fight.
Now, I promised that we would head to Washington. President Trump has ordered the evacuation of non-essential embassy staff from Iraq and from other Middle East posts. It is a precautionary move, but happens as Israel poised to begin an attack on Iran's nuclear sites, or so they are suggesting. Tim Marshall is a veteran foreign correspondent and author, told me, just helped explain the context why Israel has Iran in its sights.
They are now in the position where within just a few weeks of making a decision, they could have a nuclear weapon. So the other context is, and this is where we get into potential bluff, or are you bluffing? You've seen the IAE report this week. We've seen the Americans. I looked at their State Department's advisory note for travel. It couldn't be more stark. It says, do not travel to Iraq for any reason. So why Iraq? It's because the Iranians have always said, if Israel ever attacks our nuclear facilities, we won't just hold them responsible, we'll hold the Americans responsible. And all these targets right across the Middle East, American targets, could be hit.
Well, it comes as the US has thrown into doubt the future of the AUKUS pact struck with Britain and Australia to build nuclear-powered attack submarines. So an awful lot for us to get into. Katy Balls is Washington editor and columnist at the Times and the Sunday Times in Washington. Katy, thank you for joining us. Shall we start with this potential Iranian development that is clearly worrying for the US? Donald Trump had told Netanyahu in no uncertain terms 2 weeks ago, look, military action is not the answer here. But it looks like diplomatic efforts are, sort of to be generous, wavering.
Yes, and I think you obviously look at the decisions on diplomats and some of the travel movements, and you can see there is a concern on the US side that Israel could take action. You've had President Trump today warning that an Israeli strike on Iran could very well happen as talks over Iran's nuclear ambitions obviously are starting to stall to a degree. But the president also used this press conference where he was speaking to ultimately, I think, suggests that he didn't want this to happen, saying he'd love to avoid the conflict, saying Iran needs to negotiate and we can avoid these things. So it's one of those ones where there's still a lot of space. There are US concerns on this, but I think the president is trying to send a signal to Israel and to Iran, which is there are ways to stop some of these things happening or to pause for thought before pressing ahead.
Yeah, and there are more negotiations that the US are involved in with Iran this weekend.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, of course, we know what the US side wants to do, which is to negotiate and come to an agreement on this. The question has always been when it comes to Israel and what the Israeli government wants to do they feel as though they need US backing if they are to take more drastic action? And where does Donald Trump ultimately draw the line? The US line is still very much in the talks. The question is, are they a restraining force on the Israeli leader, Netanyahu, and do they have that influence? For now, it's quite clear what one side wants, which is whether or not Israel is working in lockstep with the US at the moment or planning to take its own action.
Yeah, the other big sort of international story when it comes to, well, really defence and security is AUKUS that could fall apart. Remind us what it is and the impact that would really have on, well, UK submarine plans.
So AUKUS is, as you just alluded to, obviously looking at the Pacific, it is the agreement, the pact between Britain, the US and Australia to build nuclear powered attack submarines. And this has been in the works for many years. This has all been agreed. This is something which you had in the Biden administration and so forth. But there is now a review being led by Albridge Colby, who is one of the senior administration figures in the Defense Department, looking at whether this is something that should continue. Now, if the US reneged on that deal. The estimates is it would cost the UK a lot of money in terms of how much Britain would have to then spend building their own submarines. But it also goes to an alliance point on geopolitics and who the UK's allies are. And there are different opinions, I think it's fair to say, in the administration in terms of where the UK and Europe should be focusing its efforts. But certainly one strain of thought and one line of argument made by some in the administration is the UK and Europe should be focusing on their own backyard. And actually, should there be this involvement when it comes to, further afield, comes to Australia? Doesn't the UK and Europe have enough to do when it comes to Ukraine and others? And then that would mean America would have to do this there. So that's one of the arguments you hear being made when we're talking about this type of thing.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a bit more with Anna and Adam in a moment or two. Couple more stories, Katie, we should get to while you are with us. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention on LA, really, the protests and the burning of the electric vehicles, the National Guard, over 2,000 of them sent into LA. And actually, it was the National Guard's involvement in the first place and the ICE demonstrations that actually sort of literally added fuel to the fire here. What seems to be happening now? Is that died down, or do you see protesters regrouping?
I think it's too soon to say it's died down, because also what we're hearing is this idea that there could be more demonstrations, both today but into the weekend. And these demonstrations could go beyond Los Angeles, and actually nationwide you could see, protest demonstrations popping up. And obviously you need to see how many people turn up. Do people go through and what they're talking about? But certainly I think, the pushback that you've seen to, Donald Trump's decision to send in the troops. You've then had this very public spat this week between Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who's ultimately been saying Trump has made the problem much worse. And then you also have Donald Trump, who is, I think, politically quite comfortable here, because the White House takes the view that for lots of American voters, they will see this as a US president bringing in law enforcement. They will look at some of those protesting, and that will not be on the side of their base. And therefore, it's a fight that I think both Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom, to a degree, both feel they have a political incentive, or, it works for their side when they're talking about it. So I think it is one of the sense of how does this now go beyond Los Angeles and to a story where you see pop-ups in other places, or does it start to die down in that sense? And I think we're not going to really know that until you get to the weekend.
What I don't think will die on is the political row between the US president and the governor of California. We've got Gavin Newsom, who wants to sue Donald Trump. Donald Trump would like Gavin Newsom arrested. I mean, what do you think will happen next?
I think this row will keep going, partly because, as I just touched on, for Gavin Newsom, he is emerging, and lots of people talk about as potentially having ambitions for the White House one day, being the Democrat nominee. As the chief Trump tormentor-in-chief, he is enjoying that position to a degree. I mean, today I think he's been talking about some of the, the personal difficulty and problems his family are having as a result of some of this. But he's also, been tweeting out Trump's border czar being, come at me, tough guy, and so forth. So he's been really leaning into the fight. But yeah, the White House certainly feel that on immigration, that's one of the areas where they think they poll best with their voters. And therefore ICE raids and using law enforcement is something that they think is their comfortable territory. So both sides quite enjoy this public fight and have completely different things they're trying to achieve with it. But both are possible because they're sending messages to different groups when it comes to the country. And
using the protest really as a platform to air them as well. Katie, thank you very much. Katy Balls, the Washington editor of The Times, speaking to us from Washington.